"Excuse me, sir." The voice cut through the bustling gate area like a blade through silk. Sharp, deliberate, designed to wound. "This line is for first-class passengers only." Brenda Walsh didn't whisper it. She projected it across Gate 47 with the precision of an actress hitting her mark. Loud enough for the businessman in the charcoal Armani suit to glance up from his Wall Street Journal. Loud enough for the elderly couple waiting patiently to exchange uncomfortable glances. Loud enough to ensure that every single person within earshot understood exactly what she meant. This young black man in a hoodie didn't belong here. Isaiah Rivers, 24 years old, stood perfectly still. His boarding pass for Seat 2A Prestige Class Summit. Air Flight 614 glowed on his phone screen, the QR code ready to scan. But Brenda Walsh wasn't looking at his phone. She was cataloging his appearance with the cold efficiency of a customs inspector. Faded black jeans with a small tear at the knee, white sneakers that had seen better days, gray hoodie pulled up slightly over wireless headphones, black canvas backpack with frayed straps. Nothing designer, nothing expensive, nothing that screamed belongs in a $12,000 cabin. In exactly 4 hours and 32 minutes, Brenda Walsh would lose everything she'd spent 23 years building. Every ounce of authority, every shred of professional credibility. Her career, her reputation, her carefully constructed kingdom. Gone. But right now, at 1:42 p.m. at LAX Terminal 6, Gate 47, she had no idea. She only knew what she saw. And what she saw in her mind was a mistake that needed correcting. Before we dive into this story, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And if you've ever been judged by your appearance, if you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere, you had every right to be hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will restore your faith in justice. Now let's rewind to 1:42 p.m. and watch how one moment of prejudice ignited a chain reaction that would change an entire industry. Isaiah held up his phone again, the boarding pass clearly visible. The QR code pulsed gently on the screen. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 2A. Brenda's perfectly painted lips, a shade of coral that matched her uniform scarf, pressed into a thin line. Her blonde hair, styled into what could only be described as a shellacked helmet of highlights, didn't move as she leaned forward. Her cold blue eyes narrowed behind mascara-heavy lashes. "Young man," she said, drawing out each syllable like she was explaining basic arithmetic to a child. "Are you sure you're in the right line?" Behind Isaiah, the elderly woman, white silver-haired, wearing a cream-colored cardigan that smelled faintly of lavender, whispered to her husband. Her voice carried in the gate area's acoustics. "This doesn't seem right." Her husband, equally uncomfortable, shifted his leather carry-on from one hand to the other. "Should we say something they didn't?" Isaiah's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near his temple, but his voice remained steady. "I'm sure. Seat 2A. Prestige class." Brenda snatched the scanner from Grace Mitchell, the gate agent who'd been standing beside her. Grace, 38, with worry lines already etched deep around her eyes, had noticed the exchange but said nothing. She suddenly found her computer screen fascinating, her fingers hovering uselessly over the keyboard. Brenda held the scanner like it was a weapon, pointing it at Isaiah's phone with theatrical slowness. She wanted him to squirm. She wanted him to doubt himself. She wanted everyone watching to see that she was the gatekeeper, the authority, the one who decided who belonged. The scanner beeped. Green light. Valid boarding pass. Prestige class. Seat 2A. Paid in full. For just a fraction of a second so brief most people would have missed it. Irritation flashed across Brenda's face. The kind of disappointment a prosecutor feels when their star witness crumbles on the stand. She'd hoped it would fail. She'd hoped the system would prove her right, would vindicate her judgment, would send this young man shuffling back to the economy line where she believed he truly belonged. But the beep was clear. The light was green. He was legitimate. The sound came out nasal, dripping with false sweetness. Well, we'll see about that. She handed his phone back, her fingers barely making contact, as if touching his device might contaminate her. Then, as Isaiah adjusted his backpack and prepared to walk down the jet bridge, she leaned in just slightly, close enough for him to hear, far enough to maintain plausible deniability. Try to stow your bag quickly. Other passengers have actual luggage they need to store. The words hung in the air like cigarette smoke. Isaiah stopped. He turned his head slowly, looking her directly in the eye. He saw the smugness there, the entitlement, the absolute certainty that she was right and he was wrong, that she belonged here, and he didn't, that the natural order of things was being disrupted by his presence. For a moment, he considered responding. He considered pulling out his other ID, the one that said Isaiah Rivers Internal Operations Auditor Summit Air. The ID that would turn Brenda's smug expression into ash in a millisecond. But he didn't. His father, Elijah Rivers, senior CEO and founder of Summit Air, had given him this assignment with one specific instruction. Go in blind. See the airline not as my son, but as a passenger. See what really happens when we're not watching. I'm seeing it, Dad. Isaiah murmured under his breath so softly only he could hear. Instead of confronting her, he simply said, Thanks. You have a good day. The politeness seemed to anger Brenda more than an insult would have, her face soured, lips pursing like she'd bitten into a lemon. Just get on the plane. As Isaiah walked toward the jet bridge, his sneakers silent on the carpeted floor, a voice erupted behind him. Male, young, eager to impress. Can you believe the nerve? Tyler Schmidt, 27 years old, with slicked-back brown hair and a nervous energy that made him constantly fidget with his tie, stood beside Brenda with his arms crossed. He was her protege, her loyal follower, desperate for her approval like a puppy waiting for a treat. Have a good day. Tyler's voice dripped with mockery as he mimicked Isaiah's polite tone. Like that's going to smooth over the fact that he doesn't belong here. Brenda snorted an unladylike sound that contradicted her carefully cultivated image of professionalism. He'll probably try to steal the silverware. Watch, these types always do. Isaiah's hand tightened on his backpack strap knuckles, going pale against his brown skin, but he kept walking. Every word was being catalogued in his memory. Every insult, every assumption, every microaggression. This was the audit. This was the truth his father needed to see. Behind him, someone else was watching. Someone else was recording. Lucia Martinez, 29 years old, with sharp features and ink-stained fingers from years of frantic note-taking, stood in the economy boarding line with her phone already out. She was a freelance investigative journalist traveling to New York for a story on housing discrimination, and what she'd just witnessed made her blood simmer with familiar rage. She tapped her camera app. Started recording. This is Lucia Martinez, and I'm at LAX right now. She whispered into her phone, keeping her voice low but her tone fierce. The small microphone picked up every syllable. I'm watching something absolutely disgusting. A black passenger just showed his valid prestige class boarding pass, and the gate agent, she panned slightly toward Brenda without being obvious, just humiliated him in front of everyone, accused him of not belonging, made him prove himself twice, and then insulted him as he walked away. Beside her, Vincent Torres, 32, with a camera operator's steady hands and a journalist's cynical eye, shook his head. His jaw was clenched. Did you get that on camera? Every second, Lucia confirmed, lowering her phone but keeping the recording running. This is going on Twitter the moment we board. I'm not letting this slide. Vincent nodded, his own phone now out, already opening his backup recording app. Good. People need to see this. Meanwhile, another witness had taken note. Dr. Judith Monroe, 54 years old, stood near the jet bridge entrance in a charcoal blazer that spoke of quiet authority. She was a prominent cardiologist board member of the National Medical Association and a black woman who'd flown prestige class hundreds of times over her 3-decade career. She'd watched the entire exchange from the premium boarding area. She'd seen Brenda's face twist with disgust. She'd heard the actual luggage comment, and she'd made a mental note. As a black woman who'd navigated predominantly white professional spaces her entire life, she knew that tone. She knew that look. She knew exactly what it meant. It was the same tone she'd heard at 28 when a hotel clerk asked if she was sure she could afford the suite she'd booked. The same look she'd received at 35 when a car rental agent questioned whether she had the credit limit for the luxury vehicle on her reservation. The same microaggression dressed up in professional language that had followed her through airports, hotels, restaurants, and boardrooms for decades. She pulled out her phone and opened her Notes app. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. Flight 614. LAX to JFK. Gate Agent Brenda Walsh. Young black male passenger. Racial profiling. Will monitor situation on board. Then she looked up, making direct eye contact with Brenda Walsh across the boarding area. It was a look that communicated volumes without a single word. I saw what you just did, and I'm not letting it go. Brenda felt the look, the weight of it. For just a moment, her confidence wavered like a candle flame in a breeze. Something about Dr. Monroe's steady gaze, the way she held herself with quiet authority, made Brenda's stomach twist uncomfortably. But Tyler's voice pulled her back to familiar territory. "Don't worry about her," he muttered, nodding toward Dr. Monroe with the casual dismissiveness of someone who'd never been on the receiving end of discrimination. "She's probably his aunt or something, here to defend him." Brenda's momentary uncertainty vanished, replaced by renewed arrogance. She snorted again. "Let her try. This is my cabin, my flight, my rules." What neither Brenda nor Tyler knew was that Dr. Monroe wasn't just any passenger. She was on the board of the National Medical Association. She was a frequent contributor to major medical journals. She'd been featured in a New York Times profile on black women in medicine, and she happened to be personal friends with Dr. Michelle Rivers Isaiah's mother and Elijah Rivers Sr.'s wife. They'd met at a medical conference 15 years ago and had stayed close ever since. Small world, even smaller when you burn the wrong bridges. One more witness watched the scene unfold with growing discomfort. Robert Callahan, 45 years old, an investment banker with gold-rimmed glasses and a Rolex that cost more than most people's monthly rent, stood near the prestige boarding line with his leather briefcase in hand. He was tall, graying at the temples in that distinguished way that opened doors in boardrooms, and he was a Gold Elite member with 200,000 miles a year on Summit Air alone. He knew what first-class service was supposed to look like. He'd experienced it on every major airline in every major city for 2 decades. This wasn't it. He'd heard Brenda's comment about actual luggage. He'd seen her sneer. He'd watched her scan that young man's boarding pass like she was hoping it would spontaneously combust and prove her suspicions correct. Robert Callahan had been in banking long enough to recognize bias when he saw it. And this was textbook discrimination. The kind that ended up in lawsuits. The kind that destroyed corporate reputations. The kind that, frankly, he found personally offensive not just as a frequent flyer, but as someone who believed in basic human decency. He pulled out his phone and opened a voice memo. "Note to self," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the gate announcements. "Flight 614 LAX to JFK. Gate agent name Brenda Walsh. Witnessed discriminatory behavior toward young black passenger in prestige class. Document for potential complaint to Summit Air customer service." He saved the memo and pocketed his phone. Then he walked down the jet bridge, his mind already composing the email he'd send the moment he landed. But he had no idea how unnecessary that email would be. Because in 4 hours, Brenda Walsh wouldn't be working for Summit Air anymore. She wouldn't be working for anyone in the aviation industry ever again. As Isaiah disappeared into the aircraft, his mind flashed back to another moment. Another airport. Another humiliation. He was 22, fresh out of MIT, wearing joggers and a hoodie on a flight from San Francisco to Seattle. He'd tried to board business class, a ticket he'd paid for with his first real paycheck from his internship at his father's company, and the gate agent had glanced at his clothes and said, "Packages go through freight, not first." Isaiah hadn't argued. He'd shown his ticket, been grudgingly allowed to board, and spent the entire flight sitting in seat 3A, feeling a shame that sat in his chest like a stone. A shame that made it hard to breathe. A shame that made him question whether he really did belong anywhere outside the spaces he'd been assigned by other people's expectations. That shame hadn't broken him. It had built him. It had lit a fire that would one day lead him to own not just the seat, but the entire system that had tried to deny him. That shame was why he was here now. That shame was why he'd agreed to his father's audit. That shame was why he wouldn't let Brenda Walsh's behavior slide into the shadows like so many complaints before his. Never again, he'd promised himself back then. Never again will anyone question if I belong. And today he was going to make sure no one else had to feel that shame either. He adjusted his backpack, pulled his hoodie down, and whispered to himself, "I'm seeing it, Dad. I'm seeing all of it." The assignment was simple. Go in blind, see what really happens, document everything. The assignment had just become deeply personal. Isaiah stepped into the prestige class cabin and stopped for just a moment, letting his senses absorb the environment. The smell hit him first. Leather polish and lavender mixed with that distinct aircraft scent of recycled air and jet fuel. The cabin hummed with a low-frequency vibration from the APU, a sound he'd learned to identify in childhood spent wandering airport terminals with his father. His sneakers sank slightly into the plush carpet so different from the hard industrial flooring of economy. Summit Air's Prestige Pod configuration was beautiful, even knowing every technical specification, every design choice, every cost per unit calculation. Each pod was a private suite with quilted leather seating that converted to a lie-flat bed-brushed chrome accents that caught the overhead lighting and a 24-inch entertainment screen embedded in the partition. Personal minibars sat discreetly to the right. Temperature-controlled air vents whispered above. Noise-canceling design kept the engine roar to a distant rumble. Luxury at 30,000 feet, a $12,000 bubble floating above the world. But for the staff serving this cabin, it wasn't just a workspace. It was a kingdom. And today, Senior Purser Brenda Walsh was the queen. Isaiah found his seat 2A front left directly adjacent to the forward galley. He noticed immediately that only a thin privacy curtain separated his pod from the flight attendant's workspace. Paper thin, almost transparent when backlit. He could already hear voices on the other side, muffled but distinct enough to make out words if he listened carefully. Perfect. He removed his hoodie, revealing a simple black t-shirt underneath, and carefully stowed his backpack in the overhead compartment. The storage bin closed with a satisfying pneumatic hiss. Then he settled into the pod, the leather creaking softly beneath his weight, and pulled out his tablet. He opened a new document. The cursor blinked expectantly against the white screen. The file was titled, Internal Audit Flight 614 Staff Conduct. He began typing today's date. Flight 614 LAX to JFK. Departure 2:30 p.m. PST scheduled. Seat 2A Prestige Class. Auditor Isaiah Rivers. Objective Document Staff Behavior Service. Quality and Passenger Treatment Protocols. Initial observations. He paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then he continued. 1:42 p.m. Gate Senior Purser. B. Walsh publicly questioned passenger credentials despite valid boarding pass. Loud performative display. made passenger verify credentials twice after system confirmation. 1:44 p.m. Gate Walsh made actual luggage comment clearly audible to multiple witnesses. Clear implication passenger does not belong in prestige class based on appearance and attire. 1:45 p.m. Gate flight attendant T. Schmidt overheard mocking passenger post-boarding. Direct quote. Probably try to steal silverware directed at black male passenger in casual clothing. Isaiah's jaw tightened as he typed, but his expression remained neutral. Other passengers were beginning to board now. He watched them from his peripheral vision, keeping his tablet angled so it looked like he was just reading something casual, maybe an article, maybe a book. Dr. Judith Monroe boarded and immediately spotted Isaiah in 2A. She gave him a small, respectful nod, the kind of acknowledgement one professional gives another. He nodded back, unsure if she was being polite or if she'd recognized something in him. Some shared understanding, perhaps. She settled into seat 2B directly across the aisle. Close enough to hear, close enough to see, close enough to bear witness. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app again, adding, "On board. Passenger from gate incident in 2A. Will observe service treatment throughout flight." Robert Callahan boarded next, his briefcase swinging slightly as he navigated the narrow aisle with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He found seat 1A right in front of Isaiah. He stowed his briefcase in the overhead bin, removed his suit jacket to reveal expensive suspenders, and sat down with a satisfied sigh. An elderly couple, both white, both probably in their 70s, settled into seats 3A and 3B. The woman wore her cream cardigan and pearl earrings. The man wore khakis and a golf shirt with a country club logo. They smiled politely at everyone, oblivious to the tension already simmering just beneath the cabin's polished surface. A corporate lawyer, sharp-looking and intense with designer frames and a no-nonsense ponytail, took seat 3C. She was already on her iPad before she even sat down, fingers flying across the screen with the manic energy of someone who believed work was the only thing that mattered. Lucia Martinez and Vincent Torres passed through Prestige on their way to Economy, their boarding passes directing them to the rear cabin. Lucia made eye contact with Isaiah for just a second, a look of solidarity of, "I see you, I'm paying attention," before disappearing behind the curtain that separated the classes. The curtain fell closed with a soft whisper of fabric. And then Brenda Walsh entered the cabin from the forward galley, followed by Tyler Schmidt and a third flight attendant Isaiah hadn't seen yet. The third flight attendant was Carmen Torres, 25 years old, Hispanic with dark hair pulled back into a regulation bun and eyes that darted nervously around the cabin like a prey animal checking for predators. She wore the same crisp navy uniform as Brenda and Tyler, but something about her body language was different. Her shoulders were hunched slightly forward. Her hands kept smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her skirt. She looked uncertain, new, scared. Brenda immediately established dominance. Her voice carried through the cabin with the confidence of someone who'd never been seriously challenged. "Carmen, check the overhead bins. Make sure everything's secured properly. Tyler, verify minibar inventory against the manifest. I'll handle passenger greetings." Carmen nodded quickly, almost bowing. "Yes, ma'am." Tyler smirked, clearly pleased to have a task that put him above someone else in the pecking order. "On it." Isaiah watched them move through the cabin, his tablet still open on his lap. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, opening the voice memo app with practiced efficiency. Then he set the phone on the small side table beside his pod screen, down recording light hidden beneath the device. He pressed record. Timestamp 1:54 p.m. The curtain between his pod and the galley was thin. Very thin. Almost transparent when light hit it from the right angle. And as Brenda Tyler and Carmen gathered in the galley workspace just a few feet away, Isaiah could hear every word. He put on his headphones, a pair of over-ear noise-canceling Bose that his father had given him for Christmas, but he didn't turn on any music. He opened a PDF on his tablet, something about aerodynamic drag coefficients and fuel efficiency calculations, and pretended to read. But really, he was listening to every single word that came through that paper-thin curtain, and every single word was being recorded. Brenda's voice came through first sharp and impatient, the tone of someone who believed her opinions were facts. "I'm telling you, Tyler's standards have just fallen through the floor. They let anyone buy a ticket these days." Tyler's laugh came quick, eager, the sound of a subordinate desperate to prove loyalty. "You mean the guy in 2A hoodie and jeans in prestige class?" Brenda's scoff was audible even through the curtain. "Unbelievable. When I started flying 23 years ago, passengers dressed up. They respected the experience. Men wore suits. Women wore dresses. Now it's like stepping into a bus station." Isaiah's fingers continued scrolling through the PDF on his tablet, but his mind was cataloging every word. His face remained neutral, passive even, but inside, anger was starting to simmer like water approaching boil. Tyler lowered his voice slightly, though not nearly enough. Probably a points upgrade, first time out of coach. He looked like he was going to a basketball court, not prestige class. "Exactly." Brenda agreed, her voice carrying that particular satisfaction people feel when someone confirms their prejudices. You can always tell. The ones who don't belong. They try to blend in, but they never quite manage it. It's in the details. The way they walk, the way they look around, like tourists in a museum not knowing how to behave. There was a pause. Isaiah heard the sound of something being opened, a storage compartment maybe, and then Carmen's voice much quieter than the other two. Tentative, almost apologetic. "He seems like a nice guy. He said thank you when you scanned his pass." The temperature in the galley seemed to drop 10 degrees based on Brenda's response. "Oh, Carmen," the condescension dripped from every syllable. "You are so wonderfully naive. You've been here, 7 weeks? 8, Carmen said softly. "Well, let me teach you something, dear." Brenda continued her tone, the verbal equivalent of patting someone on the head. "You can spot the trash a mile away, the ones who don't belong. They make everyone else uncomfortable. Look at how he's dressed. Hoodie sneakers, that ratty backpack. He's probably a rapper or one of those awful influencers who think a frown and a hoodie are a personality." "He just looks like a regular guy to me," Carmen said, her voice barely audible now. "That's the point," dear Brenda snapped, her patience clearly exhausted. "This isn't a regular cabin. This is prestige class. It's supposed to be an experience, an escape, and he is ruining the ambiance for our real passengers." Tyler chimed in again, emboldened by Brenda's rant. "Keep an eye on him. People like that, they always try to get something for free. Probably slip a bottle from the minibar into that dirty backpack when no one's looking." Isaiah added to his notes, typing silently, 1:55 p.m. Galley Senior Purser. B. Walsh openly mocking passenger. Direct quote. "Spot the trash." Don't belong people like that. Clear racial bias in language. Zero awareness that passenger can hear through thin curtain. 1:57 p.m. FAT. Schmidt joins in. Basketball court comment, probably a rapper, racially coded language. Both employees comfortable expressing bias in semi-public workspace. 1:58 p.m. FAC. Torres attempted intervention. Shut down by Walsh. Told she's naive. 1:59 p.m. Walsh actively training junior FA in discriminatory profiling. Direct quote, "You can spot the trash." The conversation in the galley continued, Brenda's voice carrying over the ambient cabin noise. She started complaining about other employees, other flights, other passengers. The gossip flowed like water from a broken faucet. That gate agent in Dallas. Jennifer, what's her name? She had the nerve to question my seating arrangement last week. Can you believe it? She's been there 6 months and thinks she can tell me how to do my job. What did you do? Tyler asked, his voice carrying genuine curiosity. I filed a complaint with her supervisor, Brenda said smugly. Made sure she understood the hierarchy. She hasn't bothered me since. Then she circled back to her favorite topic herself and her career trajectory. I had to fight for this LAX JFK route, you know, Brenda said. Isaiah could hear the pride in her voice. I told the scheduler I need this run. It's prime. High-value passengers, good tips, maximum prestige, international connections. This is where you build relationships with the passengers who matter. Tyler's voice carried a knowing smirk. What did you do to get it? Brenda laughed, a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake. Let's just say I'm very persuasive when I need to be. A dinner here, a favor there. You do what you have to do to stay on top in this industry. The people who succeed are the ones willing to play the game. The implication was clear, and it made Isaiah's stomach turn. He added another note. 2:03 p.m. Walsh implies inappropriate favors for route assignments. Possible ethics violation beyond discrimination pattern. Carmen's voice came again, still quiet, still uncomfortable. Brenda, maybe we should focus on the pre-departure service. We're about to push back. Good idea, Carmen Brenda said, though her tone suggested it wasn't a good idea at all, just a convenient excuse to stop talking about things she shouldn't be discussing in a workspace. Why don't you start preparing the beverage cart? Tyler and I will handle the cabin greeting. Yes, ma'am. There was movement behind the curtain, the sound of a cart being wheeled out, ice being scooped into a bucket, bottles clinking against each other. Isaiah glanced up from his tablet just as Carmen emerged into the cabin pushing a small beverage cart. Her face was tight with discomfort, her jaw clenched like she was physically holding back words. Her eyes didn't quite meet anyone's gaze as she moved through the cabin. She served Robert Callahan first. Good afternoon, sir. May I offer you a pre-departure beverage? Robert looked up from his phone, his expression friendly. Champagne would be lovely, thank you. Carmen poured him a glass crystal flute, perfect pour fresh strawberry garnish positioned just so. Her hands were steady, despite the turmoil Isaiah could see in her eyes. Here you are, sir. Enjoy. Thank you. She moved to Dr. Monroe next the cartwheels, whispering across the plush carpet. Good afternoon, ma'am. Pre-departure beverage. Dr. Monroe looked up from her phone, her expression warm but assessing. She was reading Carmen's body language that tells of someone in distress. Sparkling water with lime, please. Of course. Carmen prepared the drink with the same care, crystal glass, fresh lime wedge, perfect presentation. Here you are. Thank you. Dr. Monroe said, her tone deliberately kind. She could see the discomfort in Carmen's eyes, and she recognized it. The look of someone who knew something was wrong but felt powerless to stop it. The look of complicity born from fear rather than malice. Carmen moved through the cabin, serving the elderly couple, the lawyer, every passenger with quiet efficiency and genuine politeness. Her service was impeccable, textbook perfect, actually, which made the contrast with what was about to happen even more stark. And then she reached Isaiah's pod. She stopped. Their eyes met. For just a moment, communication passed between them without words. Isaiah saw the apology there, the guilt, the helplessness. Carmen saw the understanding in Isaiah's expression, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement that she was caught in something bigger than herself. Good afternoon, sir, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. May I offer you a pre-departure beverage? Sparkling water with lime. Please. Isaiah said, his voice steady and polite. He was giving her a chance to do the right thing. Carmen nodded and turned back to her cart. She reached for a crystal glass, her hand hovering over the selection, and then Brenda appeared. Carmen. The name came out like a command. I'll handle 2A. You finish with the rest of the cabin. Carmen hesitated, confusion crossing her face. Her hand was still extended toward the crystal glass, but she'd only been here 8 weeks. She was on probation. She couldn't afford to question a senior purser with 23 years of service and enough political capital to end her career with a single complaint. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly and moved away. Brenda stepped up to Isaiah's pod, took control of the beverage cart, and in that instant the atmosphere changed. The smile she'd worn for every other passenger vanished. It didn't just fade, it was stripped away, leaving behind a cold, blank mask of barely concealed contempt. Beverage. The word came out clipped, stripped of any warmth or professional courtesy. Isaiah looked up from his tablet. "I'll have sparkling water with lime, please." Brenda's left eye twitched a microspasm lasting less than a second, a neurological response to suppressed rage. Most passengers would have missed it. Isaiah didn't. She reached into the cart, but instead of pulling out a crystal glass like she'd used for every other passenger, her hand moved to a different compartment. Lower, hidden behind the premium glassware. She pulled out a plastic cup, the kind used in economy, translucent, cheap, disposable, the kind that made a hollow sound when you tapped it. She filled it with sparkling water from a bottle, her movements deliberate and slow, making sure he saw, making sure he understood what she thought of him. Then she set it on Isaiah's tray table with just enough force that water sloshed against the sides. No lime. Isaiah stared at the plastic cup for a moment. The contrast was impossible to miss. Every other passenger had been served in crystal, and here he sat with a cup that belonged in a different cabin entirely. Then he looked up at Brenda, meeting her cold gaze directly. "I asked for lime, please." Brenda's voice remained flat, almost bored. "We only have lemon for water service." Isaiah glanced at the cart. He could see the lime container right there sitting in the ice bucket, clearly visible. 3 fresh limes pre-cut into perfect wedges waiting to be used. He said nothing about this obvious lie, just looked back at Brenda. "Lemon is fine." "Thank you." Brenda grabbed a lemon wedge with tongs, dropped it into the plastic cup without ceremony, and turned to walk away. But she didn't make it 2 steps before a voice stopped her. "Excuse me, miss." Dr. Judith Monroe's voice was polite, but it carried the unmistakable tone of someone who would not be ignored. The voice of someone used to being heard in operating rooms where lives hung in the balance. Brenda turned slowly, her face already tightening with irritation. "Yes." Dr. Monroe gestured toward Isaiah's pod, her hand making a small, precise movement. "I believe the gentleman asked for sparkling water with lime. I can see the limes in your cart from here." Brenda's face flushed slightly, a pink tinge creeping up her neck. "The limes are reserved for premium cocktails, Doctor." Monroe raised one eyebrow, a gesture she'd perfected over decades of dealing with incompetent residents and arrogant colleagues. "Interesting. Because you just gave Mr. Callahan a gin and tonic with lime not 3 minutes ago. I watched you prepare it." The cabin went quiet. The ambient noise seemed to fade. No more rustling newspapers, no more tapping on keyboards, no more quiet conversations. Every passenger's attention pivoted toward the confrontation. Robert Callahan, who'd been scrolling through his phone, looked up. The elderly couple stopped their quiet conversation about their grandchildren. Even the corporate lawyer paused her furious typing, her fingers frozen above the iPad screen. Brenda opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's different. How Dr. Monroe's voice remained measured, but her gaze was surgical steel. "Please, explain to everyone in this cabin how it's different." Brenda's flush deepened, spreading across her cheeks. "I don't appreciate being questioned while I'm trying to do my job. And I don't appreciate watching a passenger receive inferior service based on Dr. Monroe paused meaningfully, letting the silence do the work. Whatever criteria you're using to make these decisions, Tyler Schmidt, who'd been standing near the galley entrance wringing his hands, stepped forward in a misguided attempt to defend his mentor. "Ma'am, we're just trying to serve all passengers efficiently." "Then serve him efficiently." Dr. Monroe interrupted, her voice sharp, now cutting through Tyler's weak justification. "With the same glassware, the same garnishes, the same respect you just gave that man in 1A. Robert Callahan cleared his throat, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to boardroom negotiations. "She's right. I did just get lime in my drink." And he held up his crystal flute. "I received a crystal glass, same as everyone else." The elderly woman in 3A leaned forward slightly, her grandmotherly demeanor hardening into something more fierce. "Dear, just give him the lime. This is getting silly." Isaiah finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "It's okay. Really. I don't need lime." But Dr. Monroe wasn't backing down. She'd spent 30 years fighting battles like this. Smaller ones, larger ones, battles in hospital corridors and medical conferences and academic journals. And she was done staying quiet. "It's not about the lime," she said, her voice carrying through the cabin with absolute clarity. "It's about the principle. It's about why this passenger, and only this passenger, is being treated differently." She pulled out her phone with practiced efficiency. "I want your name and employee number, and I want to know who your supervisor is." Brenda's confidence shattered like dropped crystal. The facade crumbled. I'm the senior purser on this flight. I don't have a supervisor on board." "Then I'll need the name of your ground supervisor," Dr. Monroe said, opening her notes app and positioning her fingers over the keyboard. "And the station manager. And the customer service director for LAX." She began typing, her voice narrating as she wrote, "I'm documenting this. The time is now 2:11 p.m. Flight 614. Senior purser. Brenda Walsh refused service accommodation to a prestige class passenger, provided inferior glassware plastic instead of crystal, claimed limes were reserved despite having them readily available, changed her story when confronted with facts." She looked up from her phone, her gaze boring into Brenda. "This is textbook discriminatory service, and I'm a board member of the National Medical Association. I know exactly who to send this report to." From the back of the cabin near the economy curtain, Lucia Martinez had pulled out her phone. She was filming now, no longer hiding it, no longer pretending to be discreet. Her camera was pointed straight at the scene unfolding in Prestige, capturing every word, every facial expression, every microaggression. She whispered to Vincent, who was standing beside her, also recording. "Are you getting this?" Vincent nodded, his phone steady in his trained hands. Every word, already backed up to cloud storage. Brenda's hands trembled as she reached into the ice bucket. She grabbed a lime wedge with her fingers, not tongs this time, just her bare fingers, and dropped it into Isaiah's plastic cup. The movement was so sharp that sparkling water splashed onto his tray table, creating a small puddle that spread toward his tablet. There, she hissed through clenched teeth. Satisfied, Isaiah calmly picked up a napkin cloth, at least not paper, and wiped the spilled water. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, completely composed. "Thank you," he said quietly. Dr. Monroe wasn't finished. Her voice cut through the tense silence. "And the glassware?" Brenda stared at her, incomprehension mixing with anger on her face. "The glassware, yes, the crystal glass, like everyone else received." For a long, excruciating moment, the cabin held its breath. Even the air vents seemed to quiet the white noise of the aircraft fading into nothing. Everyone was watching. Robert Callahan had fully put down his phone, now his attention completely focused on the confrontation. The elderly couple had stopped pretending not to stare. The lawyer had closed her iPad, her professional instincts telling her she was witnessing something that would end up in a lawsuit. Finally, Brenda grabbed a crystal glass from the cart. Her movements were jerky, aggressive, the opposite of the smooth professional service she'd demonstrated for other passengers. She poured the water from Isaiah's plastic cup into the crystal glass liquid, sloshing and spilling, because her hands were shaking now, actually trembling with rage, and something else, fear maybe, or the first recognition that she'd made a terrible mistake. Then she slammed the glass onto his tray table. The impact was so hard that water sloshed over the rim and onto the polished wood surface, creating another puddle. "Will that be all, sir?" She spat venom, dripping from every syllable. Isaiah looked her dead in the eye. His voice remained soft, measured, but it carried through the cabin like a prophecy. Like the moment before thunder when you can feel the electricity in the air. For now. Those two words landed with the weight of a verdict. The cabin felt it. Everyone felt it. There was something in Isaiah's tone that suggested this wasn't over. Not even close. That for now contained multitudes, a promise, a threat, a reckoning deferred but inevitable. Brenda spun on her heel and stormed back toward the galley, Tyler scurrying behind her like a nervous puppy. Carmen, who'd been frozen near the back of the cabin during the entire exchange, slowly returned to collect the beverage cart, her face pale and her hands visibly shaking. As she passed Isaiah's pod, she whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry." Isaiah looked at her, saw the genuine distress in her eyes, and nodded once. "Not your fault." But Carmen knew it was, at least partly. She'd stayed silent. She'd watched it happen. And now, as she pushed the cart back toward the galley, she felt sick. Actually nauseous, her stomach churning like she might throw up. The moment the curtain closed behind them, Brenda's voice erupted like a volcano that had been building pressure for hours. "Who the hell does she think she is?" Brenda's voice shook with rage, loud enough that Isaiah could hear every word through the thin curtain. Loud enough that several passengers in the front rows shifted uncomfortably in their seats. That uppity doctor sitting there like she's some kind of authority questioning my service in my cabin. Tyler's voice nervous now, no longer eager. "Brenda, people can hear you." "I don't care!" Brenda shrieked, her voice climbing an octave. "This is my cabin. I've been flying for 23 years, and I will not be lectured by some self-righteous woman or some wannabe thug in a hoodie sitting in a seat he probably can't even afford." Carmen's voice quiet and horrified Brenda. "You can't say that." "I can say whatever I want back here." Brenda snapped, her breathing heavy and ragged. "This is our space. The galley is crew only. What happens here stays here. That's always been the rule." Isaiah's fingers moved across his tablet, typing rapidly. 2:15 p.m. Galley. Walsh uppity, doctor, wannabe thug, explicit racist language. Zero awareness that passenger can hear through curtain. Hostile work environment for junior crew member Torres. Tyler's voice again trying to regain Brenda's favor and restore some sense of control. "She's out of line, that doctor. Interfering with crew duties. We should file a complaint." "Exactly," Brenda said, her breathing still heavy. "And that passenger in 2A. You watch. He's going to be trouble. People like that always are. They come in here with their attitudes, their phones ready to record everything, looking for something to complain about so they can get free flights or settlements." Carmen tried once more, her voice barely a whisper. "Brenda, he hasn't done anything wrong. He's just sitting there reading." "Carmen." Brenda said, her voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. The kind of cold that makes people step backward. "Listen very carefully. If you want to keep this route, if you want to move past probation, if you want any future in this company, you need to learn something important. Right now." Carmen's voice was trembling. "What's that?" "There are passengers who belong in Prestige," Brenda said slowly, deliberately, each word enunciated like she was teaching a child basic vocabulary. "And passengers who don't. You need to learn to tell the difference. It's not written in any manual. It's not something they teach in training. But it's essential. It's survival. But how do you tell?" Carmen asked weakly. You'll know when you see them, Brenda interrupted, her voice harsh. Trust me, it's not something you can explain in words. It's instinct. Experience. I've been doing this for 23 years. I know who belongs and who doesn't. And that passenger in 2A. He doesn't belong, Tyler chimed in, eager as always to prove his loyalty. She's right, Carmen. I learned that fast when I started working with Brenda. The ones in hoodies and sneakers and ripped jeans, they're trying to game the network. Points, upgrades, companion passes, booking mistakes. They slip through the cracks in the system. And it's our job to make sure they know this isn't for them. We maintain the standard. But he paid for his ticket. Carmen said, her voice so quiet, Isaiah almost couldn't hear it through the curtain. Did he? Brenda's voice dripped with skepticism. Or did he use miles from his grandmother's account? Or find some loophole online? Or buy a mistake fare that the airline should have canceled? People like him don't just drop $4,800 on a 5-hour flight. They can't afford it. So they find ways around it. And we're the last line of defense. Isaiah added to his notes. 7 p.m. Walsh training, Torres in discriminatory profiling. Direct quote, learn who belongs. Schmidt confirms pattern game the network. Both employees operating under assumption that appearance determines economic status and right to service. 2:18 p.m. Explicit assumption that black passenger in casual clothes cannot afford prestige fare. Clear racial bias embedded in operational philosophy. Torres appears uncomfortable but compliant due to fear of job loss. The conversation continued for another few minutes. Brenda complained about other crew members who didn't understand her methods. She talked about other passengers who'd gotten uppity with her in the past. She gossiped about which flights had the best tips, which passengers were worth the extra attention, which ones weren't worth the effort. And through it all, Carmen Torres stood in that galley and hated herself for staying silent. She wanted to object. She wanted to say, this is wrong. This is discrimination. This is everything we're not supposed to be. But she was 8 weeks into her dream job. She was on probation. She had a younger brother in college tuition she was helping to pay because their parents couldn't afford it. She needed this job. She needed the income. She needed the health insurance. She couldn't afford to speak up. So she stayed silent. And that silence, that complicit, fear-driven, completely understandable silence, would haunt her for months to come. Flight 614 pushed back from the gate at 2:28 p.m., exactly on schedule. The engines spooled up with their characteristic rising whine. The aircraft taxied toward the runway with the gentle rocking motion of wheels on concrete, and within 15 minutes they were airborne. Los Angeles spread out below them, climbing through layers of smog and marine layer until they broke into crystalline blue sky. Isaiah stared out the window as the city sprawled into abstract patterns. From up here, everything looked small, orderly, equal. The mansions in Beverly Hills looked the same size as the apartments in Compton. The executive offices in Century City were indistinguishable from the warehouses in Long Beach. Height had a way of equalizing everything, making the divisions that seemed so important on the ground fade into irrelevance. He caught Dr. Monroe's eye across the aisle. She mouthed 2 words. I'm sorry. Isaiah shook his head slightly and mouthed back, not your fault. But something in Dr. Monroe's expression suggested she disagreed. It was everyone's fault, her look seemed to say. Everyone who stayed silent. Everyone who looked away. Everyone who decided it wasn't their problem. Every person who'd ever witnessed discrimination and chosen comfort over confrontation. Every bystander who'd ever thought, I'm glad it's not me, but I'm not getting involved. Collective responsibility, collective guilt, collective complicity. The first hour of the flight passed in relative quiet. The seatbelt sign turned off with a soft chime. Passengers settled in with movies books, work the familiar rituals of air travel. The cabin attendants moved through with drink refills and snack baskets. their professional smiles firmly in place like masks they'd learned to wear so well, they'd forgotten they were masks at all. Carmen delivered the meal menus, moving through the cabin with quiet efficiency. She gave one to Robert Callahan with a smile, one to Dr. Monroe with careful politeness, one to the elderly couple with gentle consideration, one to the lawyer with professional respect. When she reached Isaiah's pod, she set the menu down carefully and whispered, barely audible, "I'm truly sorry for how you're being treated. This isn't right." Isaiah looked up at her. He saw the guilt in her eyes, the shame, the helplessness. But he also saw something else, the trapped desperation of someone who knew what the right thing to do was but couldn't bring herself to do it because the cost seemed too high. "It's not your fault," he said softly. Carmen's eyes welled up. She blinked rapidly, trying to force the tears back, trying to maintain her professional composure. "It is, though, at least partly." She moved on before Isaiah could respond, before her emotions could overflow in a place where she couldn't afford to let them show. Tyler Schmidt took the meal orders 30 minutes later. He was professional with Robert Callahan, warm with Dr. Monroe, perfectly polite with the elderly couple. But when he reached Isaiah, his voice flattened into something mechanical. "Meal selection." "No, sir. No, what can I get for you? No, have you had a chance to review the menu?" Just 2 words clipped and cold, delivered with all the warmth of a parking ticket. "I'll have the chicken, please," Isaiah said, his voice steady. Tyler made a note on his tablet without making eye contact and moved on without another word. 30 minutes later, the meals arrived. Carmen wheeled out the service cart, and one by one she delivered beautifully plated dishes to each passenger. The presentation was impeccable, the kind of service that justified the $4,000 fare, the kind of attention to detail that made premium travel feel genuinely premium. Robert Callahan received a filet mignon on fine china, perfectly cooked to medium rare, with roasted vegetables and a red wine reduction. The plate was garnished with microgreens and edible flowers. A cloth napkin, heavy metal cutlery with the Summit Air logo etched into the handles. Dr. Monroe received pan-seared salmon with quinoa and grilled asparagus, the fish's skin crisped to golden perfection. Same china, same presentation, same attention to detail. The elderly couple received their choices with the same level of care, careful plating, appropriate portions, everything arranged with the aesthetic consideration of a high-end restaurant. The lawyer, absorbed in her iPad, barely looked up, but her meal was impeccable nonetheless. And then Carmen reached Isaiah's pod. She set down his meal, and her face went pale. The color drained from her cheeks like someone had opened a valve. The chicken was served on a plastic tray. Not china. Plastic. The kind used in economy. The kind that bent slightly when you pressed on it. The cutlery was plastic, too. A flimsy fork and knife wrapped in a paper napkin, the kind that would snap if you tried to cut anything tougher than butter. Isaiah stared at it. Then he looked up at Carmen. Her eyes screamed apology, but her mouth stayed closed. She moved on quickly, pushing the cart back toward the galley with jerky, urgent movements. Dr. Monroe had seen it. Of course she had. She'd been watching like a hawk since the beverage service incident, cataloging every interaction, every discrepancy, every microaggression. She set down her fork, metal heavy, properly balanced, and called out loud enough for the cabin to hear. "Excuse me. Tyler." Tyler appeared from the galley, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. Why is his meal on a plastic tray?" Dr. Monroe pointed at Isaiah's pod, her gesture precise and deliberate. Tyler glanced over, and for just a second, panic flashed across his face. Real fear. We ran out of china settings." Robert Callahan turned around in his seat, his gold-rimmed glasses catching the overhead light. "That's odd. Mine just came on china. My neighbor's got china. How did you run out in a 12-seat cabin?" Tyler's face flushed. I'll check with the purser." He disappeared into the galley. Muffled voices followed Brenda's sharp and defensive Tyler's nervous and stuttering. And then 2 minutes later, Brenda emerged. She walked to Isaiah's pod, snatched the plastic tray without a word, without even looking at him, and disappeared back into the galley. 3 minutes later, Isaiah timed it on his phone. She returned. The meal was now on china, but the food was lukewarm. She'd let it sit deliberately in the galley, letting the heat leach out of it, letting the sauce congeal, letting the vegetables go from crisp to soggy. A passive-aggressive compliance that was somehow worse than open refusal. She set the plate down on his tray table without meeting his eyes, without speaking, and walked away. Isaiah picked up his fork, now metal properly weighted, and took a bite of the lukewarm chicken. It was edible. Barely. The texture was off. The sauce had separated, the vegetables were limp. He added to his notes, 3:22 p.m., discriminatory meal service, plastic tray and plastic cutlery provided, while all white passengers received china and metal, only corrected after witness intervention. 3:28 p.m. Walsh forced to correct service, but deliberately delayed redelivery, allowing food to cool. Passive-aggressive compliance demonstrates pattern of bias cannot be corrected through confrontation alone. Pattern observation. Walsh only modifies behavior when publicly challenged by high-status passenger. Does not respond to direct complaints from affected party. From her seat in economy, Lucia Martinez had been monitoring the prestige cabin through the gap in the curtain. She'd seen the plastic tray. She'd heard Dr. Monroe's intervention, and now she pulled out her phone and started typing a Twitter thread. Tweet 1. On Summit Air Flight 613 LAX to JFK. Watching textbook discrimination in prestige class. Young black passenger being subjected to completely different service standards. Thread. Tweet 2. Gate agent questioned if he belonged. Senior purser gave him plastic cup when others got crystal. Made a scene over a lime. Entire cabin witnessed it. Hashtag Summit Air. Hashtag discrimination. Tweet 3. Now his meal came on plastic tray while white passengers got china. When passenger in 2B called it out, purser grudgingly switched it, but let the food go cold first. This is 2024. Hashtag Summit Air. Hashtag racial profiling. She attached a short video clip, 20 seconds of the plastic tray being visible before Carmen took it away, and Dr. Monroe's voice clearly audible asking why he received different service. She hit send. Within minutes, the retweets started. 1247 89 143 287. The numbers climbed faster than she'd expected. Comments flooded in. This is disgusting. I fly Summit all the time and never knew this was happening. The plastic tray while everyone else got china. That's not even subtle. Name and shame. Which flight attendant? The hashtag Summit Air started trending. First in Los Angeles, then California, then nationwide. 1,200 tweets and counting, then 2,000, then 5,000. People were watching, people were angry, and the story was just beginning to spread across the interconnected web of social media, jumping from Twitter to Reddit to Facebook to Instagram, each platform amplifying the outrage, each share adding momentum to a wave that was about to crash over Summit Air's corporate headquarters. An hour and 15 minutes into the flight with the aircraft cruising at 39,000 feet somewhere over Kansas, Isaiah reached for his personal minibar. It was built into the side panel of his pod, a sleek compartment stocked with premium snacks, bottled water, small bottles of top-shelf liquor, and artisanal chocolates. The minibar was included in the prestige class fare, a paid amenity explicitly listed in the booking confirmation part of the $12,000 experience. He pulled out a bottle of water, twisted off the cap. The seal cracked with a satisfying snap. Brenda appeared within seconds. She must have been watching. She must have been waiting for him to do something, anything that she could use against him. Her timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Excuse me. Her voice was sharp, accusatory. What do you think you're doing? Isaiah looked up, genuine confusion crossing his face. Getting water from my minibar. That minibar is stocked for premium passengers, Brenda said, her voice dripping with false authority. Isaiah's eyebrows rose slightly. I'm in seat 2A, prestige class. The minibar is included in the fare. Not for upgrade passengers, Brenda countered her tone, suggesting she'd caught him in a lie. I'm not an upgrade passenger, Isaiah said, his voice still measured but with an edge now. I paid full fare. Tyler appeared beside Brenda like a loyal henchman, his tablet in hand. Those items are charged separately if you're on a points ticket, sir. I'm not on a points ticket, Isaiah said, his voice hardening slightly. I paid full fare. $4,800. Brenda crossed her arms, a defensive posture that made her look smaller despite her attempt at authority. Let me see your receipt. The cabin, which had been relatively quiet, went still. The white noise of the engines seemed to fade into the background. Even passengers who'd been absorbed in their entertainment screens looked up, tuning in to the confrontation like it was a reality show playing out in real time. Dr. Monroe's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel through tissue. This is absurd. You don't ask other passengers for receipts. Robert Callahan turned in his seat, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to corporate boardrooms and hostile negotiations. I've opened my minibar 3 times already, helped myself to whiskey water and cashews. No one asked me for proof of purchase. That's because Mr. Callahan is a Gold Elite member, Brenda said, grasping at straws, trying to find any justification that would hold water. And how do you know he isn't? Robert shot back, gesturing toward Isaiah with an open hand. Isaiah reached for his phone with deliberate slowness. He opened the Summit Air app, navigated to his booking with practiced efficiency, and turned the screen toward Brenda. Prestige class full fare. Flight 614 LAX to JFK. Seat 2A. Total $4,800. Payment method. Credit card, ending in 4729. Confirmation code, WX7P2M. Below that, in bold letters, Platinum Elite status. Lifetime miles, 347,892. Current year, miles 89,456. Brenda's face went pale. She stared at the screen, her eyes scanning the information, desperately looking for something, anything that would prove her right, that would vindicate her judgment, that would explain away what was becoming increasingly obvious even to her. But it was all legitimate, every detail, every dollar, every mile. She should have backed down. She should have apologized. She should have walked away and thanked whatever deity she believed in that Isaiah seemed willing to let it slide. Instead, she doubled down. These can be faked, she said, her voice wavering slightly. Tyler nodded quickly, desperate to support her. Screenshots can be doctored. It's actually really easy with the right apps. Dr. Monroe stood up from her seat, her voice rising with genuine incredulity. Are you serious right now? You're accusing him of forgery because he dared to use an amenity he paid for? The elderly woman in 3A leaned forward, her grandmotherly patience finally exhausted. This is getting ridiculous. Just let the man have his water. Carmen emerged from the galley, her face tight with barely controlled anxiety. She'd heard the confrontation. She knew where this was heading. Brenda, she said quietly, trying to diffuse the situation. His app shows platinum status. That's real. You can see the account verification badge right there. Brenda whipped around, her fury now directed at Carmen. Did I ask for your opinion? Carmen. Carmen's voice trembled. No. But. Then keep quiet and learn your place. Brenda snapped, her voice loud enough that several passengers flinched. The cabin went cold. Even Tyler looked uncomfortable now, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a child who wanted to leave but didn't know how. Isaiah set his water bottle down on his tray table with deliberate care. He looked at Brenda, really looked at her, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with unmistakable authority. "Ms. Walsh, I'm not going to argue with you. I know my rights as a prestige passenger. I know Summit Air's policies down to the paragraph and subsection." "Do you?" Brenda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Isaiah continued, his voice steady as bedrock. "Because if you did, you'd know this behavior violates Section 4.2 of the Summit Air Passenger Bill of Rights. Discriminatory service. Unequal treatment based on passenger appearance or assumed economic status. Harassment. Public humiliation." He paused, letting the words sink in like rain into parched earth. "I'll be filing a formal complaint, not just about the minibar, about everything since I boarded this aircraft. The plastic cup, the meal tray, the comments I heard through that curtain, all of it." Brenda tried to regain control, but her voice shook. "You're welcome to file whatever you want. It won't go anywhere. Do you know how many complaints I've had in 23 years? 0 that stuck. 0 that mattered. 0 that changed anything." Isaiah's expression didn't change. His voice remained steady, but underneath was steel. "We'll see about that." He picked up his water bottle, took a sip, and put his headphones back on. Brenda and Tyler retreated to the galley, but the confidence was gone now. Something had shifted. The balance of power was no longer clearly in Brenda's favor, and she could feel it slipping through her fingers like sand, like water, like everything she'd built over 2 decades was suddenly standing on a foundation made of paper. Lucia Martinez, still monitoring from economy, tweeted again. "Update Purser, now accusing passenger of theft for using his own paid minibar. Demanding receipts. Calling his airline app fake. Threatening him with charges. Never seen anything like this. Video uploading. Hashtag Summit Air, hashtag racial profiling." She attached a video clip, 20 seconds of Brenda demanding to see Isaiah's receipt, Isaiah calmly showing his app and Brenda claiming it could be faked. The video was viewed 12,000 times in 10 minutes, then 50,000, then 100,000, then 250,000. Comments flooded in faster than Lucia could read them. She really said his airline app was fake. The app literally connects to their servers. "This is horrifying. I'm never flying Summit again until they address this." Notice how she didn't question any of the white passengers' credentials. The internet was paying attention now, and it was getting very, very angry. In the galley behind the closed curtain, Brenda paced in the narrow space like a defense attorney waiting for a verdict. Her face was flushed, her hands trembling with a mixture of rage and something else, fear perhaps, though she'd never admit it. "This is getting out of hand," she said to Tyler, her voice low but intense. Tyler nodded, his own confidence shaken. The eager puppy energy was gone, replaced by the nervous tension of someone who realized they might have backed the wrong horse. "What do you want to do? We need to remove him," Brenda said. Carmen, who'd been restocking napkins in the corner, froze. "Remove him? On what grounds?" "He's making other passengers uncomfortable." Brenda said, the words coming fast now, desperate, grasping at anything that might justify what she wanted to do. Tyler hesitated. "Is he, though Dr. Monroe is defending him? That businessman in 1A spoke up for him. The couple in 3A. They're being manipulated." Brenda interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "They don't understand what we see. We have experience. We know how to read passengers, and that passenger in 2A is trouble. He's been recording conversations. Because you've been discriminating against him," Carmen said, her voice stronger now, louder. The fear was still there, but underneath it was anger, moral clarity cutting through the fog of self-preservation. Brenda's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Whose side are you on?" Carmen's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She thought about her brother, about his tuition, about her rent, about her probation status, about everything she had to lose. And then she thought about the look in Isaiah's eyes when Brenda had slammed that crystal glass onto his tray table. The quiet dignity. The refusal to fight back not because he couldn't, but because he was choosing not to. Because he was documenting everything. Because he was building a case. I'm on the side of not lying in an official report. Carmen said, her voice trembling but determined. Brenda took a step toward her, invading her personal space. You're on thin ice, Torres. Probationary employees should think very carefully before challenging senior staff. One complaint from me and you're gone. Do you understand gone? Carmen's throat tightened. She wanted to say more. She wanted to scream. But she stayed silent. Tyler, Brenda said, turning away from Carmen like she no longer existed. Get the tablet. We're filing an incident report. Tyler retrieved the crew tablet from the charging station with shaking hands. He pulled up the incident report form, a digital document that would be transmitted immediately to the flight deck and to Summit Air's Ground Operations Center. What do I write? Brenda began dictating, her voice taking on a false official tone, passenger in seat 2A exhibiting concerning behavior. Refusing to comply with crew instructions regarding minibar access. Carmen's eyes went wide. That's a lie. He didn't refuse anything. Brenda ignored her. Continue recording crew members without consent, verbally aggressive toward senior purser, creating a hostile environment for other passengers and crew. Brenda. That's all false. Carmen tried again, her voice rising. Carmen. Brenda said, her voice dropping to something dangerous and quiet. The kind of quiet that makes people step backward. Last warning, walk away now or you'll be part of the problem. And trust me, you don't want to be part of the problem. I've ended careers for less. Carmen's hands trembled. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab that tablet and throw it across the galley. She wanted to march into the cabin and tell every passenger exactly what was happening. But she didn't. She thought about her brother sitting in a lecture hall at Arizona State, unaware that his sister was facing the biggest moral decision of her life. She thought about her mother who cleaned houses for a living and had cried with joy when Carmen got this job. She thought about the studio apartment she could barely afford, even with a flight attendant's salary. And she stayed silent. Tyler continued typing, his fingers moving across the screen as Brenda dictated, Passenger has demonstrated pattern of aggressive behavior, including challenging crew authority, questioning service standards, using device to record crew without permission, making other passengers uncomfortable with confrontational attitude. Multiple crew members can corroborate. That's nonsense. And you know it, Carmen whispered. Life's tough, Brenda said without looking at her. You'll learn. Brenda reviewed the report, made a few edits, and nodded with satisfaction. Submit it. Tyler's finger hovered over the submit button. For just a moment, one brief, shining moment, he hesitated. Some part of his brain, the part not desperate for Brenda's approval, the part that still remembered basic human decency, was screaming at him to stop. But then Brenda looked at him, and that look said everything. You're either with me or against me. Choose. Tyler hit submit. The report went out instantly, transmitted via satellite communication to the flight deck and to Summit Air's Operations Center in Seattle. Within seconds, it would be on record. Official. Part of Isaiah Rivers' passenger file. What now? Tyler asked, his voice small. Now Brenda said, straightening her uniform and smoothing her hair with practiced movements, we go tell him he's being relocated. If he refuses, we call the captain. And if the captain can't control the situation, we request law enforcement meet the aircraft upon landing. This ends now. Carmen's voice was barely a whisper. This is wrong. Brenda turned to her, and for the first time there was something almost sad in her expression. Not regret, but a kind of weary inevitability. The look of someone who'd made so many compromises that they no longer recognized where the line was. This is how the world works, Carmen. The sooner you learn that, the better off you'll be. The passengers who matter, who tip well, who write complimentary emails, those are the ones we protect. The ones who cause trouble. We remove them before they can damage our reputation. That's the job. That's survival. And with that, Brenda pushed through the curtain and back into the cabin, ready to make the mistake that would end her career. Isaiah had just returned from the lavatory when he found Brenda and Tyler standing at his pod, waiting. Brenda's arms were crossed, her posture defensive despite her attempt to project authority. Tyler held the crew tablet like a shield, his knuckles white against the device. Something in their body language made Isaiah's stomach tighten. This was it. This was the escalation he'd been waiting for and dreading. Mr. Brenda paused, realizing she still didn't know his last name. After 3 hours of serving him, monitoring him, discriminating against him, she'd never bothered to learn his name. Rivers, Isaiah said quietly. Isaiah Rivers, Mr. Rivers. Brenda said, her voice formal now, almost rehearsed, like she was reading from a script she'd practiced. We've received a complaint. Isaiah set his tablet down on his tray table. A complaint. About what? About your behavior, Brenda said. Isaiah's eyebrows rose slightly. My behavior. Specifically, what behavior are you referring to? Another passenger reported feeling uncomfortable with your presence in this cabin, Brenda said, her voice flat, emotionless. Which passenger? We're not at liberty to disclose that information. Convenient, Isaiah said flatly. Tyler stepped forward, reading from the tablet like a nervous prosecutor. According to Summit Air's in-flight security protocol, Section 7.3, we have the authority to relocate passengers who cause distress to other guests or who exhibit concerning behavior that may compromise cabin safety or comfort. Isaiah leaned back in his seat, his posture deliberately relaxed. And what concerning behavior have I exhibited? Tyler glanced at Brenda, then back at the tablet, his voice wavering slightly. You've been recording crew members without consent. I've been sitting here with headphones on, reading on my tablet. Isaiah said, his voice still measured but firm. You've been verbally aggressive toward the senior purser. I asked for lime in my water and questioned why my meal came on a plastic tray, Isaiah said. That's not aggression. That's a legitimate service complaint. Would you like me to recite Section 4.2 of the Passenger Bill of Rights, which explicitly protects passengers' right to report service discrepancies? Tyler faltered. Brenda jumped in, her voice rising slightly. Mr. Rivers, we're trying to resolve this situation amicably. We're offering you a complimentary seat in main cabin extra. It's a very comfortable section with extra legroom. I paid $4,800 for prestige class. Isaiah said, his voice still measured but with steel underneath now. I'm not moving. Sir. No. The word was quiet but absolute. Final. I haven't done anything wrong. I've been sitting here quietly for over 2 hours. I haven't raised my voice except to respond to questions. I haven't threatened anyone. I haven't caused any disturbance. And I'm not leaving this seat. Doctor. Judith Monroe, who'd been listening to every word, stood up from her seat. Her voice carried through the cabin with surgical precision. What is happening here? Brenda turned toward her, irritation flashing across her face. Ma'am, this doesn't concern. It absolutely concerns me. Dr. Monroe interrupted, her voice sharp now. You're about to forcibly remove a paying prestige class passenger. On what grounds? Security reasons, Brenda said, grasping at the vaguest possible justification. Dr. Monroe's laugh was bitter and sharp. Security reasons. This man has been sitting here reading for 2 hours. He's been quieter than I have. The only security threat I see is your behavior creating a hostile environment. Robert Callahan stood up from his seat in 1A and turned around, his gold-rimmed glasses catching the overhead light. I've been sitting directly in front of him. Haven't heard a peep. Hasn't caused any issues. This is completely unjustified. The corporate lawyer in 3C finally looked up from her iPad, her professional instincts fully engaged now. I'm an employment attorney specializing in workplace discrimination cases. What I'm witnessing here is actionable hostile service. You're creating the disturbance, not him." The elderly woman piped up, her voice surprisingly firm for someone who'd been quiet most of the flight. "We haven't complained about anything. Leave the young man alone." Brenda's face went from flushed to pale in seconds. The cabin had turned against her. She'd expected compliance. She'd expected embarrassment. She'd expected Isaiah to quietly accept the relocation to avoid making a scene the way most passengers did when confronted with authority. She had not expected the entire cabin to revolt. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, the tablet nearly slipping from his sweaty hands. He whispered urgently, "Brenda, we should stop." But Brenda was too far gone. 23 years of unchecked authority, of making decisions without consequences, of treating passengers like subjects in her kingdom, of never being seriously challenged. It was all crashing down in real time, and instead of retreating, she doubled down. "You're all being manipulated," she said, her voice rising with desperation. "You don't understand the full situation. You don't see what we see from our position." "Then explain it," Dr. Monroe said forcefully, her hands on her hips now, her full height and authority on display. "Explain to all of us why this passenger, and only this passenger, is being treated this way." Brenda's mouth opened and closed. No words came. Because there was no explanation she could give that wouldn't expose her own bias. Dr. Monroe pulled out her phone with practiced efficiency. "I've been recording this interaction since you approached his seat. Everything you've said is documented, time-stamped, saved to cloud storage." Lucia Martinez's voice came from the economy section behind the curtain, but clearly audible. "So have I." She held up her phone, visible through the gap in the curtain. Robert Callahan raised his phone. "And me. This whole conversation is recorded." Suddenly, Brenda was surrounded by 3 phones, all recording, all documenting, all waiting for her next move. The panopticon had reversed. The watchers had become the watched. Tyler whispered urgently, "Brenda, we need to stop this now." But Brenda, authority crumbling, control slipping, made the fatal mistake that would end everything. She reached out and grabbed Isaiah's arm. "You're coming with me. Now." Her fingers wrapped tight around his bicep, hard enough to leave marks hard enough that Isaiah felt the pressure even through his t-shirt sleeve. The cabin gasped collectively. Dr. Monroe shot to her feet. "Do not touch him." But Isaiah didn't pull away. He didn't resist. He didn't escalate. He simply looked down at Brenda's hand on his arm. Her fingers wrapped around his bicep, her knuckles white with pressure, and then looked up at her face. And he smiled. Not a smug smile, not a triumphant smile, but the smile of someone who'd just watched their opponent make the one mistake that could never be taken back. The smile of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. The smile of someone who knew with absolute certainty that justice was about to be served. "Ms. Walsh," Isaiah said softly, his voice carrying through the silent cabin. "Take your hand off me." Brenda's grip tightened for just a second, her desperation overwhelming her judgment. "You're being relocated. Take your hand off me. Now." Something in his voice, not the volume, but the certainty, the absolute unshakable confidence, made Brenda's fingers loosen. She let go her hand, dropping to her side like puppet strings cut. Isaiah straightened his sleeve where she'd grabbed him. He could see the red marks her fingers had left on his brown skin. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a call. The cabin was so quiet that everyone heard the ringtone. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. "Isaiah." A man's voice, deep and authoritative, came through the speaker. "Is it time?" Isaiah's eyes never left Brenda's face. "Dad, it's time." He ended the call, set his phone down on the tray table, and looked up at Brenda Walsh. "You have about 4 minutes." Brenda Walsh's face went from pale white to ashen gray in the span of a heartbeat. Tyler Schmidt looked like he might pass out his hand reaching out to steady himself against the seat back. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The entire cabin had frozen, every passenger holding their breath, waiting. Isaiah stood up slowly. He pulled down his hoodie completely, revealing his face fully for the first time since boarding. The cabin finally saw him clearly. Young, composed, radiating a quiet authority that made Brenda take an involuntary step backward. "Ms. Walsh," Isaiah said, his voice filling the cabin without shouting. "Let me introduce myself properly." He reached into his backpack, still stowed in the overhead bin, and pulled out a slim leather wallet. From it, he extracted an ID card and held it up for everyone to see. The card was professional laminated with the Summit Air logo embossed in gold at the top. His photo, his name, and his title. Isaiah Rivers, Internal Operations Auditor, Summit Air Corporate, Authorization Level Executive. "My name is Isaiah Rivers." His voice resonated through the cabin. 24 years old. MIT graduate, aerospace engineering and business administration, dual degrees, summa cum laude. He let that settle. Watched Brenda's face drain of remaining color. "For the past 8 months, I've been the internal operations auditor for Summit Air." The cabin remained utterly silent. Even the engine noise seemed to fade into nothing. This flight 6114, wasn't a coincidence. Isaiah continued. "It was an audit, a test. My father, CEO Elijah Rivers Sr., asked me to fly undercover because over the past 4 months we've received 19 formal complaints about discriminatory treatment on our prestige routes." Tyler's tablet clattered to the floor. The sound echoed in the silent cabin like a gunshot. 19 complaints, Isaiah repeated, letting the number hang in the air. All from passengers of color. Black passengers. Latino passengers. Asian passengers. All describing the same pattern: hostility at boarding, degraded service, onboard public humiliation, and in 3 cases, threats of removal or actual removal from premium cabins. He turned slightly, addressing the cabin, now not just Brenda. "We couldn't verify these complaints from customer service reports alone. Too many were marked as resolved at the station level. Too many got buried under the label of misunderstanding or passenger overreaction. Too many disappeared into a system that seemed designed to protect employees rather than passengers." Dr. Monroe's hand went to her mouth, her eyes glistening. Robert Callahan closed his eyes and shook his head slowly. The elderly couple stared in stunned silence. Isaiah's gaze returned to Brenda. "So I came to see the truth for myself, to experience what these 19 passengers experienced, to document what really happens when someone doesn't look like they belong in prestige class." His voice hardened now, each word deliberate and devastating. "And what I found was worse than we feared." He began listing, his voice steady as bedrock. "I was profiled at the gate. You questioned my credentials twice, even after the system confirmed my boarding pass. You made a public comment about actual luggage to humiliate me in front of other passengers." Brenda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Once on board, I was mocked behind that curtain." Isaiah pointed toward the galley. "I heard every word. Wannabe thug. People like that. Spot the trash. You called me trash, Ms. Walsh. You said I didn't belong here. You told a junior flight attendant to learn who belongs in this cabin." Carmen's face crumpled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Then you gave me a plastic cup when every other passenger received crystal. You claimed limes were reserved until Dr. Monroe called you out. You served my meal on a plastic tray while everyone else got china. You let my food go cold before redelivering it. You fabricated a security complaint to justify removing me from a seat I legally purchased." Isaiah's voice dropped lower, each word cutting like a blade. "And then you put your hands on me." He pulled up his sleeve, showing where Brenda's fingers had gripped his arm. There were faint red marks on his brown skin, 4 distinct finger impressions. 14 witnesses, 3 video recordings, and audio documentation of every conversation in that galley. He held up his phone. I've been recording since 1:54 p.m. Every single word. Uppity doctor, wannabe thug. People like that always try to get something for free. All of it. Time-stamped. Saved. Backed up to cloud storage. The color drained completely from Brenda's face. Tyler had gone green, his hand pressed against his stomach like he might be sick. Isaiah addressed the cabin again. To everyone who spoke up today, Dr. Monroe, Mr. Callahan, ma'am. He nodded to the lawyer. Thank you. Your willingness to intervene, to question what you saw, to refuse to stay silent, even though it would have been easier to look away. That's what changes things. That's what stops this from happening to the next passenger. Lucia Martinez stepped forward from the economy section, her own phone in hand, still recording. It's already uploaded, already spreading. Hashtag Summit Air is trending nationally. Over 50,000 tweets in the last hour. Isaiah nodded to her. Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Lucia Martinez, freelance investigative journalist. Thank you, Ms. Martinez, for bearing witness. He turned back to Brenda, stepped closer. She stepped back, her body language now that of prey, not predator. The power dynamic had completely reversed. You called me trash, Isaiah said quietly. You said I didn't belong here. You were wrong on both counts. He gestured around the cabin. This airline, I grew up in it. I spent my childhood in maintenance hangars watching mechanics rebuild engines. My teenage years sitting in operations meetings learning about crew scheduling and route planning. My 20s in every single department baggage handling customer service flight operations, catering ground crew maintenance. I know this airline better than most executives who've worked here for decades. Another step closer. Brenda backed into the galley curtain. I watched my father build Summit Air from one leased Boeing 737, bought, used, financed on a prayer to a fleet of 73 aircraft operating in 42 cities. I watched him sacrifice time with his family, sacrifice vacations, sacrifice his own comfort to make sure this airline stood for something, stood for dignity, for respect, for service that treated every passenger like they mattered. Isaiah's voice went cold. And starting today, you will never work in this industry again. The forward cabin door opened. Elijah Rivers Sr. stepped through. Elijah Rivers Sr. was 52 years old, but he carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd earned every year through hard work and harder decisions. He stood 6'2" with salt and pepper hair trimmed military short and wore a charcoal suit tailored to perfection. His presence filled the narrow aisle without him saying a word. Behind him came 2 men in dark suits, corporate security officers. One of them, Daniel Park, Director of Corporate Security, and a woman in a navy blazer carrying a tablet, Cynthia Blackwell, Vice President of Human Resources. The CEO didn't speak immediately. He walked past Brenda Walsh without acknowledging her existence. His eyes focused solely on his son. Every step was measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of authority built over 3 decades. When he reached Isaiah, he pulled him into a brief but powerful embrace. You okay, Elijah? Senior asked quietly. His voice meant only for his son. I'm fine, Dad, Isaiah replied. Elijah Sr. held his son's shoulders for a moment, looking him in the eye, making sure he really was okay. His hands tightened briefly, a father's protective instinct cutting through the CEO's professional composure. Then he released him and turned to face the cabin. Good afternoon, passengers of Flight 614. His voice was deep, resonant, authoritative without being aggressive. I apologize for this disruption. My name is Elijah Rivers. I'm the CEO and founder of Summit Air. Robert Callahan whispered under his breath, barely audible. Holy. Today, Elijah Sr. continued his voice carrying to every corner of the cabin. My son was subjected to treatment that violates every principle this airline was founded on. But he wasn't the first passenger to experience this. He paused, letting that sink in. And if we hadn't acted, he wouldn't have been the last. He turned to face Brenda directly. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. When he spoke again, his voice was cold, not angry, but absolutely devoid of warmth. The voice of someone passing judgment. Brenda Walsh, you are terminated. Effective immediately. Brenda's legs gave out. She grabbed the galley counter to stay upright, her knuckles white against the chrome surface, her whole body trembling. Security will escort you off this aircraft the moment we land. You will not return to any Summit Air facility. You will not contact any Summit Air employee. Your employment is over. He turned to Tyler. Tyler Schmidt, you are also terminated. Tyler made a choking sound, his face contorting with shock and the beginning of tears. You enabled this behavior. Elijah Sr. continued, his voice unwavering. You participated in it. You laughed at it. You helped fabricate a false security report designed to remove a passenger based on his appearance. That makes you equally responsible. Cynthia Blackwell stepped forward, her tablet open, her voice professional but firm. Ms. Walsh, Mr. Schmidt, I need your crew badges, your access cards, and your tablets. Now. Neither of them moved. They just stood there, frozen in shock, unable to process what was happening, unable to believe that 23 years and 2 years respectively could end in minutes. Now. Elijah Sr. repeated his voice, dropping an octave. With trembling hands, Brenda unclipped her badge from her uniform. The small piece of metal and plastic that had defined her identity for over 2 decades. Tyler fumbled with his lanyard, his fingers shaking so badly he could barely manage the clasp. They surrendered their equipment piece by piece. Badges, access cards, crew tablets, everything that had given them authority, everything that had marked them as Summit Air employees. The security officers, Daniel Park and his colleague, took positions on either side of Brenda and Tyler. Elijah Sr. addressed the cabin again, his voice softening slightly. To the passengers who spoke up today, Dr. Monroe, Ms. Martinez, Mr. Callahan, everyone who refused to stay silent when silence would have been easier. Summit Air will be contacting you within 24 hours. Your flights will be fully refunded. You'll receive lifetime Summit Elite status with all associated benefits. And if you're willing, we'd very much like your testimony as part of our internal investigation. Dr. Monroe stood, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. You'll have it. All of it. Every word I heard, every action I witnessed, every moment of this flight. Thank you, Doctor. Elijah Sr.'s expression grew somber. To everyone else on this flight, I apologize. What happened here today is not who Summit Air is. This is not who we will ever be again. We failed. I failed. And I'm going to spend every day moving forward making sure this never happens to another passenger. He placed his hand on Isaiah's shoulder, a gesture of both support and pride. This is my son. He's the future of this company. And he just showed me something I'd been too comfortable to see, that the culture we built, the values we claimed to uphold weren't reaching every corner of our operation. That there were people in positions of authority who'd never truly understood or believed in what we stand for. He looked back at Brenda with undisguised disgust. A lot of work remains. Daniel Park spoke quietly to Brenda and Tyler, his voice low but clear. You'll both be escorted to the rear galley for the remainder of the flight. Upon landing, you'll be taken directly to airport security offices, where you'll collect your personal belongings and be escorted from the premises. Do not attempt to speak to passengers or crew. Do not attempt to remove any company property beyond your personal items. Do you understand? Brenda nodded mutely, her body language defeated. Tyler looked like he might cry, his eyes red-rimmed and glassy. As the security officers began to escort them away, Elijah Sr. raised his voice slightly. "One more thing." Brenda stopped, turning slightly. "In my 30 years of building this airline, I've terminated exactly 11 people for cause. 11 out of thousands of employees over 3 decades. His voice was heavy with something between anger and profound disappointment. "You didn't just fail at your job today, Ms. Walsh. You betrayed everything this company was built to represent. I want you to understand that, to carry that knowledge with you." Brenda's face crumpled, but not with remorse, with the crushing realization that she'd lost everything. In one flight, 4 hours, 23 years of seniority, of accumulated political capital, of carefully constructed authority, gone. The security officers led them toward the rear of the aircraft. The cabin watched in silence as Brenda Walsh took her walk of shame through the very cabin she'd ruled with prejudice and contempt. Past the passengers she'd served with smiles, past the witnesses who'd seen her mask slip, past the future she'd just destroyed with her own hands. When they disappeared behind the curtain, Elijah Sr. took a long breath and turned to the one crew member left standing in the galley entrance, Carmen Torres. She stood pressed against the wall, her whole body shaking, tears streaming down her face but making no sound. She was trying to disappear, trying to become invisible, knowing that any second now the CEO's attention would turn to her. And it did. Miss Elijah Sr.'s voice wasn't harsh, but it was firm, expectant. Torres Carmen whispered, "Carmen Torres. Miss Torres, please step forward." Carmen's legs barely worked, but she forced herself to move. She walked slowly toward Isaiah and his father, her hands twisted together, her vision blurred with tears, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. When she reached them, she couldn't look up. She stared at the floor and whispered, "I'm so sorry." Isaiah looked at Carmen, seeing the genuine anguish on her face. Not the calculated tears of someone trying to escape consequences, but real, gut-deep remorse. "How long have you been with Summit Air? 8 weeks. Carmen managed her voice breaking. "This is my 3rd flight on this route. And when you tried to speak up," Isaiah continued gently, "when you said I was just a passenger and that I seemed nice, what did Ms. Walsh do?" Carmen's voice fractured mid-sentence. "She shut me down." Her hands twisted together, knuckles white. "She said I was naive. She said if I wanted to keep this route, I needed to learn who belonged in prestige and who didn't." The cabin's collective intake of breath was audible. Elijah Sr.'s expression darkened. "She trained you to profile passengers." Carmen nodded, tears falling faster now. "I didn't want to, but I was scared." Her whole body began to shake. "I'm on probation. I have a younger brother in college, Arizona State. I'm helping pay his tuition because our parents can't afford it. Half of it comes from my paychecks. If I lost this job..." She couldn't finish. Didn't need to. I thought if I spoke up too much, if I questioned her too much, I'd be gone. And I need this job. I need it so badly. She finally looked up first at Isaiah, then at his father, her eyes red and swollen. But I should have said something anyway. I should have stopped her. "I heard everything she said about you, and I just stood there." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I'm a coward." Dr. Monroe's voice came from her seat, quiet but clear. "How many others?" Carmen turned toward her, confusion crossing her tear-stained face. "What? How many other junior flight attendants did Brenda Walsh train the same way you were trained?" Carmen's silence was answer enough. Elijah Sr. turned to Cynthia Blackwell. "I want every crew member who's worked with Brenda Walsh in the past 5 years interviewed. Every single one. I want to know how deep this pattern runs. How many others were taught to discriminate, and how many passengers were affected." Cynthia nodded, making notes on her tablet with swift, efficient movements. "Yes, sir. We'll begin interviews tonight. I'll have a preliminary report on your desk by Monday morning." Isaiah crouched slightly so he was at Carmen's eye level. "Ms. Torres, I'm not going to fire you." Carmen's head snapped up, shock replacing the despair on her face. "You're not... No. But you're going on probation. Different probation. A 6-month accountability program. You'll work directly with me, with HR, and with our new passenger advocacy office. And you're going to help me fix this." Carmen nodded frantically, desperately. "Anything. I'll do anything." "Good," Isaiah said, his voice firmer now. "Because you're going to tell your story. Every new hire at Summit Air is going to hear what happened on this flight. They're going to hear what you witnessed, what you stayed silent about, and why staying silent was wrong. You're going to teach them how to speak up even when it's terrifying, even when their job might be at risk." Carmen wiped her face with shaking hands, smearing mascara across her cheeks. "Yes, sir. I will. I promise I will." "And one more thing," Isaiah added. "That direct line to the passenger advocacy office we're creating. You're going to help design it. You're going to make sure every employee knows they can report discrimination anonymously safely, without fear of retaliation. Because you understand what happens when that system doesn't exist." "Yes, sir," Carmen said again, her voice stronger now. Something was shifting in her expression from despair to determination, from helplessness to purpose. Elijah Sr. studied her for a long moment. Then he said, his voice measured, "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Ms. Torres. It's acting despite the fear. You failed that test today, but you'll get another chance." He paused, letting his words settle. "Don't waste it." Carmen's voice was barely audible. "I won't. I swear I won't." Isaiah stood and faced the empty space where Brenda had stood even though she was gone now, but his words were meant for everyone in the cabin. 23 years, Ms. Walsh. You could have been a mentor, a leader, someone that junior crew members looked up to and learned from. His voice carried through the cabin. Instead, you built a small kingdom based on fear and bias. And today, that kingdom fell. The cabin remained silent, not triumphant, not celebratory, just heavy with the weight of what they'd all witnessed. Because everyone understood they'd seen something bigger than one person getting fired, bigger than one passenger standing up for himself. They'd seen a broken culture exposed. They'd seen the first painful steps toward building something better. And they'd seen that change required more than just one person speaking up. It required everyone refusing to look away. Flight 614 touched down at JFK International Airport at 6:27 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 minutes ahead of schedule. The landing was smooth professional, the kind of textbook touchdown that passengers barely noticed. But instead of taxiing to a normal gate at Terminal 4, the aircraft was directed to a remote stand away from the main terminal, away from crowds, away from the usual chaos of arrivals. But the media was already there. Somehow, through Lucia's viral Twitter thread, through Dr. Monroe's connections, through the 17 previous complaints that had finally found their voice, through the mysterious alchemy of social media outrage, the story had exploded during the flight. From 1,200 tweets to 47,000 retweets. From regional interest to national trending topic. From a few thousand views to millions of impressions across every platform. The hashtag #SummitAir was trending #1 in the United States. Hashtag Brenda Walsh was trending in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Atlanta. Hashtag Isaiah Rivers was trending everywhere. Hashtag Prestige. While Black had been coined and was gaining momentum. Hashtag Summit Karma was being used by people sharing their own stories of discrimination. News vans lined the perimeter road. Camera crews set up positions on the tarmac with telephoto lenses. Journalists checked their microphones and reviewed their notes, preparing for what they knew would be a major story. The story of discrimination at 30,000 feet. The story of a CEO's son going undercover. The story of a flight attendant who'd spent 23 years building a career on bias and finally faced consequences. Before the cabin door opened, Elijah Sr. stood and addressed the passengers one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, before you deplane, I want to thank you again. What happened today should never have happened. But your courage to speak up, your refusal to stay silent, your willingness to stand with someone who was being mistreated, that's what will change this industry." He paused, choosing his words with the care of someone who understood their weight. "When you exit, you'll see media waiting. You're under no obligation to speak with them. This is your choice. But if you do choose to share your experience, know that Summit Air supports you. We'll be sharing our own statement within the hour, and we welcome your voices being part of this conversation." The passengers filed out slowly, processing everything they'd witnessed. The cabin felt different now, charged with the electricity of shared experience of having been present for something that would be talked about for years. Some stopped to shake Isaiah's hand. Their grips were firm, meaningful, conveying respect and solidarity without words. "Doctor." Monroe embraced him tightly, her professional composure finally cracking slightly. She whispered, "You did the right thing. Your father raised you well." Robert Callahan patted his shoulder, his investment banker's reserve melting into genuine warmth. "You're going to make a great CEO someday, kid. Not because of your last name, but because of your character." Lucia Martinez handed him her card, professional, embossed with multiple contact numbers. "Call me if you ever need a journalist who tells the truth without sensationalizing it. And thank you for making me believe the system can still work when good people refuse to back down." The elderly couple, who'd been quiet for most of the flight, stopped beside Isaiah. The woman patted his arm with her age-spotted hand, her touch gentle but firm. "My grandson is about your age. He's black too. I'm going to tell him about you, about what you did here today, about choosing dignity over anger." Isaiah's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you, ma'am." When the cabin was nearly empty, Brenda Walsh and Tyler Schmidt were escorted off. Flanked by security heads, down, badges gone, they walked through the jet bridge toward an uncertain future. The cameras swarmed immediately, a wall of lenses and microphones, and shouted questions. "Ms. Walsh, do you have a statement, Brenda? Why did you target that passenger? Is it true? You have a history of discrimination? Complaints. Ms. Walsh, what do you say to accusations of bias?" Brenda tried to push through, keeping her head down, but a reporter, a young woman with determination etched into her features, blocked her path. "Ms. Walsh, you've been terminated after 23 years. Do you regret your actions?" Brenda stopped. For just a moment, she looked up at the camera. Her eyes were red from crying, her face blotchy and swollen, her carefully constructed helmet of hair now disheveled from hours of stress. And she said in a voice barely above a whisper, "I was just doing my job." The reporter's expression hardened. "Your job was to discriminate." "No." Brenda's voice rose, defensive now, desperate. Her composure shattered completely. He didn't look like he belonged in prestige class. How was I supposed to know he was the CEO's son? The reporter leaned in, microphone extended, sensing the moment. "So, if he wasn't the CEO's son, your treatment would have been acceptable." Brenda's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping for air. No words came, because she'd just revealed the truth she'd been denying all along. The truth that everyone watching already knew, but needed to hear from her own lips. It wasn't about policies. It wasn't about security. It wasn't about service standards or passenger behavior or any of the justifications she'd constructed. It was about who she thought belonged and who she thought didn't. And that judgment was based entirely obviously on how someone looked. Security pulled her away, but the damage was done. That soundbite. He didn't look like he belonged would be on every news channel within the hour. It would be clipped, shared, dissected, analyzed, and replayed millions of times. Brenda Walsh had just become the face of discrimination in the airline industry. Inside the terminal, Isaiah and his father walked side by side. Cynthia Blackwell and Daniel Park flanked them, creating a protective barrier as journalists shouted questions from all directions. Mr. Rivers. Elijah. How does it feel to be profiled on your own airline, Isaiah? What do you want people to learn from this? Mr. Rivers, Sr. Will there be criminal charges, Isaiah? Are you pressing charges for assault? Isaiah stopped walking. His father placed a hand on his arm, concerned, but Isaiah shook his head gently. It's okay, Dad. I want to say something. He turned to face the cameras. Microphones extended toward him like a forest of metal and foam. Cameras focused their lenses, capturing every detail of his expression. The terminal grew quiet as people stopped to watch curious travelers becoming witnesses. My name is Isaiah Rivers. He began, his voice steady and clear, carrying through the terminal. And tonight I was discriminated against on Summit Air Flight 6114. Not because of my behavior, not because I violated any policy or rule, but because of how I looked. The journalists went silent, letting him speak, recognizing that this was the statement that would lead every broadcast. I want to be absolutely clear about something. Isaiah continued, his voice growing stronger. What happened to me tonight happens to passengers every single day. Black passengers, Latino passengers, Asian passengers, Muslim passengers, passengers with disabilities, LGBTQ passengers, passengers who don't fit someone's narrow, prejudiced idea of what belongs in a premium cabin or a first-class lounge or a luxury hotel. His voice resonated with conviction. The only difference between my experience and theirs is that I have a platform. I have a father who owns the airline. I have resources and power and the safety net of privilege. But what about the passengers who don't? The ones who get removed quietly, who don't make the news, who are told it's not worth the fight or to just let it go, or that it's not that bad. A reporter called out, "What's Summit Air doing to address this?" Isaiah looked at his father, who stepped forward to answer. Effective immediately. Elijah Sr. said, his voice carrying the weight of institutional commitment. Summit Air is launching a comprehensive review of every passenger complaint filed in the past 5 years. We're implementing mandatory anti-discrimination training for every employee, flight attendants, gate agents, customer service representatives, ground crew, maintenance, staff management. Everyone. No exceptions. He continued, we're creating an anonymous reporting system for employees who witness discrimination or hostile behavior. We're partnering with civil rights organizations to conduct independent audits of our service standards. And we're establishing a permanent passenger advocacy office with direct authority to investigate complaints and recommend personnel action. Another reporter shouted, Will you press charges against Brenda Walsh for assault? Elijah Sr. looked at his son. Isaiah thought for a moment, the cameras capturing every nuance of his expression, then spoke directly into the lenses. No, I won't press criminal charges, but I will make sure that what happened today becomes part of the permanent record. I want every airline, every hospitality company, every customer service organization to know what happened here. Not to destroy Ms. Walsh personally, but to make sure this pattern of behavior ends. Industry-wide. He took a breath, gathering his thoughts. This isn't about revenge. It's about change. Real, lasting, meaningful change that protects the next passenger and the one after that and every person who shouldn't have to prove they belong somewhere they paid to be. One final question from the back of the crowd. What would you say to other passengers who've experienced discrimination? Isaiah's answer came immediately without hesitation. fueled by the memory of being 22 and humiliated in San Francisco. Document everything. Record it if you can safely and legally. Speak up. File formal complaints. Don't suffer in silence. Because silence is how people like Brenda Walsh stay in power for 23 years. Silence is how broken cultures persist. Silence is how injustice becomes normal. He paused, making direct eye contact with the camera. And if you're on a flight, any airline, and you see someone being treated the way I was tonight, say something. Use your voice. Use your privilege if you have it. Use your camera. Stand up. Intervene. Because the only way this changes is if we all refuse to accept it. Change doesn't happen when one person speaks up. It happens when everyone stops staying silent. The camera flashes intensified. The questions multiplied. But Elijah Sr. put his arm around his son's shoulder and guided him toward the exit, their security team clearing a path through the crowd. As they walked away, Lucia Martinez's voice carried over the chaos. That's what accountability looks like, and the crowd behind them erupted in applause. By midnight, Isaiah's statement had been viewed 5.7 million times across all platforms. By 1 Hubburg AM, hashtag #RealChange was trending worldwide. By 3 Surrey AM, 3 other major airlines, Delta, United, American, had announced similar policy reviews and mandatory training initiatives. And somewhere in a fast food restaurant off the Interstate 95 in northern New Jersey, Brenda Walsh watched her own soundbite on the TV mounted above the fryer. He didn't look like he belonged. Her manager walked past a 26-year-old named Kyle who'd been working fast food since high school. He barely glanced at her. "You gonna stand there all night or you gonna flip those burgers?" Brenda picked up the spatula with hands that still trembled. Her kingdom had fallen, and unlike fairy tales, there would be no redemption arc, no second chances, no miraculous restoration. Just burgers, grease stains, and the TV playing her greatest shame on an endless loop. 6 months after Flight 614 on a cold February morning with frost still clinging to the windows, Dante Jackson boarded Summit Air Flight 203 from Atlanta to Chicago. He was 21 years old, a college senior majoring in civil engineering with a 3.8 GPA, and dreams of designing bridges that would last centuries. This was a birthday gift from his grandmother, his first time flying prestige class. His first time experiencing what premium travel was supposed to feel like. He wore his university hoodie with the school logo across the chest, faded jeans with paint stains from his volunteer work, building houses with Habitat for Humanity, and carried a backpack full of textbooks and engineering manuals. As he walked down the jet bridge, his heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Please don't let them question me. Please don't let them treat me like I don't belong. But when he reached the aircraft door, the flight attendant, Emily Weaver, a woman in her 30s with warm eyes and a small enamel pin on her uniform that read, "Dignity First," smiled genuinely. "Good morning, Mr. Jackson. Welcome aboard. You're in seat 3A right up front. May I help you with your bag?" Dante blinked, surprised. You know my name." Emily's smile widened. "Of course. I make a point of learning every prestige passenger's name before boarding. It's part of our new service standard. Makes the flight feel more personal, don't you think?" "Yeah," Dante said, a smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, it really does." He settled into his pod, the leather creaking softly beneath him, and when Emily came by with the pre-departure beverage service, she asked, "What can I get you, Mr. Jackson? We have champagne, orange juice, coffee, or sparkling water." Sparkling water, with lime. Perfect choice. Coming right up." She returned moments later with a crystal glass perfectly garnished with fresh lime. "Here you are, and I'll bring you some warm almonds in just a moment." As she walked away, Dante looked down at the crystal glass in his hand. He pulled out his phone and texted his grandmother, "Graham, you won't believe this flight. They're treating me like I matter, like I belong here." Her response came immediately. "Baby, you do matter. Always have, always will. I'm glad somebody finally showed you that." Later in the flight, as the cabin quieted, Emily approached Dante's seat again. "Mr. Jackson, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but you're actually one of my first prestige passengers since I completed our Dignity First training program." Dante looked up from his thermodynamics textbook. "Dignity First." Emily's expression grew serious. "It's a mandatory program now for every Summit Air employee. It was created after an incident on one of our flights. A passenger was mistreated, discriminated against because of how he looked, and our CEO decided that could never happen again." She pulled a small card from her pocket and handed it to Dante. "If you ever experience anything on any Summit Air flight that doesn't feel right, if anyone makes you feel unwelcome or uncomfortable, this card has a direct line to our passenger advocacy office. It's completely anonymous, safe, monitored by senior leadership." Dante took the card. It was simple but powerful. "You belong here. If someone makes you feel otherwise, we want to know." Below that was a QR code and a toll-free number. That's really cool," Dante said, genuinely moved. Emily's voice softened. "We learned the hard way that silence protects the wrong people. So now we make it easy to speak up, for passengers and employees." As she walked away, Dante looked down at the card in his hand. Then he tucked it carefully into his wallet next to his student ID and the photo of his grandmother. For the first time in his life, flying prestige class felt exactly like what it was supposed to be: respectful, dignified, and genuinely welcoming. Not because of his last name or his bank account or the clothes he wore, but because he was a human being who deserved to be treated with basic decency. 1 year after Flight 614, Dante Jackson stood on a stage at Georgia Tech wearing a cap and gown holding a diploma in civil engineering. His grandmother sat in the front row, beaming with pride, tears streaming down her face as she clutched a tissue in her weathered hands. After the ceremony, as families celebrated and cameras flashed in the bright Georgia sun, Dante was approached by a man in a dark suit. "Dante Jackson." Dante turned confused. "Yes." The man smiled and extended his hand. "Isaiah Rivers, Vice President of In-Flight Experience and Passenger Advocacy, Summit Air." Dante's eyes went wide. "The Isaiah Rivers from the flight. That's me," Isaiah said, his smile warm and genuine. "I read your application essay for our engineering internship program. You wrote about a flight you took. Said it changed how you saw yourself." Dante's face flushed. "I didn't know you'd actually read it. I thought those went to HR or something. I read every application that mentions that flight. There have been 47 so far." Isaiah's expression grew thoughtful. "Your essay stood out. You wrote, 'For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere I'd always been told wasn't for people like me.'" "That's powerful." "It was true," Dante said quietly. "That flight, the way I was treated, it made me believe I could aim higher, apply for better opportunities, not limit myself based on what other people thought I deserved." Isaiah nodded. "That's exactly what dignity does. It doesn't just change a moment, it changes a trajectory." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This is your formal offer for our summer engineering internship. Paid position housing stipend included, and if everything goes well, there's a clear path to full-time employment after graduation." Dante took the envelope with shaking hands. "I thank you. Thank you so much." Isaiah shook his hand firmly. "You earned it with your grades, your recommendations, your potential. But I want you to remember something." "What's that?" "When you start working at Summit, you're going to see things. Maybe not as extreme as what happened to me, but small moments. Little injustices, times when someone's being dismissed or disrespected. And when you see those moments and I need you to speak up. Isaiah's voice intensified. Not because it's easy, not because it's comfortable, but because that's how we keep the change alive. One person at a time, one moment at a time, refusing to let bias go unchallenged. Dante stood up straighter, his grandmother's teachings and his own experiences converging into clarity. I will. I promise. Isaiah smiled and handed him a business card. My direct line. If you ever need anything, advice, support, or just someone who understands, call me. That's not an empty offer. As Isaiah walked away, Dante's grandmother came up beside him. What was that about? Baby Dante opened the envelope, read the offer letter, and felt tears welling up. It's a job, Graham. At Summit Air. Engineering internship. Everything we talked about. His grandmother pulled him into a fierce hug. I knew you could do it. I always knew. In a world of snap judgments, what you see is rarely what you get. A hoodie can hide boundless potential. A uniform can hide deep prejudice. Brenda Walsh and Tyler Schmidt built their small kingdom on the belief that some people belonged and others didn't. They forgot the most fundamental rule: everyone deserves respect. Their downfall wasn't just losing their jobs, it was the exposure of their limitations broadcast for the world to see. Isaiah Rivers didn't just expose two people. He challenged an entire industry to decide what it truly stood for. And justice, when done right, doesn't just punish it, protects everyone who comes after. What did you think of this story? Have you ever been judged by your appearance or seen someone treated unfairly? I want to hear from you. Drop your experience in the comments right now. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about how we treat each other, do me a favor. Hit that like button. It helps more people see this message. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that standing up for what's right matters. And subscribe to this channel because we're bringing you more stories where justice wins, where dignity matters, where good people refuse to stay silent. Click that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications, because next time it could be your story, your moment, your chance to make a difference. And when that moment comes, I want you to remember Isaiah's words. Change doesn't happen when one person speaks up. It happens when everyone stops staying silent. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.